Hello, everyone. This is Reyes Ramirez with Fresh Arts. It is Thursday, April 9th. If you're watching this in the future, just know that right now the city of Houston has requested a moment of silence at noon, so we're going to honor that. Okay, thank you. So kind of moving along, again, like I said, I'm Reyes Ramirez with Fresh Arts. If you've been here or if you've tuned in before, this is a workshop series digital that we're offering digitally. And what we're doing is we're hosting discussions with experts, with people in the community regarding the impact and ways to navigate the COVID-19 crisis. And so today we have some really great guests. And so we have Sue Phalen with SCORE, as well as Earle Bolks, also with SCORE. They'll get a moment to introduce themselves in a moment. But first, let me kind of give a preface to what is going to happen, or at least this discussion. This is a mentorship for small businesses facing hardships during COVID-19. And SCORE is a really great organization that Sue will be getting into describing and going into the purpose of. But just know that today's session will be more informative on the more on the informative side, as we are learning more about a resource and also getting some really great insight into this crisis from financial experts who have been in the field and are helping artists, small businesses every day. And so starting off, we have Sue. Sue, hello, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting us to join you, and we hope that you and your families are staying healthy at this very difficult time. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce SCORE. We're a national volunteer organization that have been serving the small business community since 1964. We're mentors and educators to America's small businesses. And today we have over 10,000 volunteers nationally. Luckily for everyone on this, our largest chapter with 156 members is in the Houston area. We're the largest chapter in the country. And we have a stellar team of successful volunteers who are distinguished in that they have real world experience and that they are dedicated to helping the small business community survive in these tough times and to thrive in the recovery. Our skill set includes all the disciplines of business and a vast cross-section of industries. Today, Earle and I are here to talk about disasters, both physical and economic. COVID-19 is an economic disaster, but before we do that, I'd like to touch briefly on physical disasters. We in the Houston area are not strangers to this. Certainly after Harvey and Imelda, it's very near to home. And it should surprise you that Texas is #1 in the nation for disasters. Now, we in Texas, as Texans, we like to be #1, but this is not a challenge we like to win. And if you were to draw a line across the state of Texas, it would be I-35. And that is the spine. And those counties east of I-35 suffer the most disasters. So we have been working with the Texas Division of Emergency Management beginning last year to help build disaster resilience for small business. And we understand that small business does not have a lot of time. And so what we did was we took a checklist approach. First of all, to prepare, and then to build a continuity of operations plan. So we want to turn you to our website where you can find all the resources to help you with respect to the next disaster. But with that in mind, I want you now to talk to Earle, who is our expert with the COVID economic disaster. And so I'd like to introduce Earle.
Actually, give me a second. Some questions for you to kind of before we get into the deep and the nitty gritty. So thank you for giving that breakdown of SCORE, perhaps some insight on the COVID-19 crisis. But before we get to Earle, can you please give an overview of SCORE's other programs that's been usually doing its usual practices? And then could you also maybe describe the mentor program a bit?
Certainly. So first of all, what everyone needs to understand is that we truly are a free service, okay? This is a volunteer-driven organization. As I said, it was national. With a volunteer force of over 10,000, you have to understand that our overhead staff is 13 people. Our national headquarters are outside of DC. And so we're a very lean organization, and we do not charge except a very nominal fee for some of our education services. And that's in case we are actually having to pay for the facility that we're hosting it at. We have a very incredibly robust education program over a vast array of subjects based on demand for those subjects. And then in addition to that, we have a very strong mentorship program. We have 14 offices in the Houston area. And all you need to do is go on to score.org and request a mentor, and one will be assigned to you. And right now, although we are not in the office, we are helping people virtually through video mentoring, phone messaging, phone mentoring, email mentoring. So please, at the end of this, I know you're going to have more questions because this is not an easy subject. Many of you have not necessarily built your small businesses, your one-off, your single proprietors. You may or may not have employees, and managing growth, managing all the other management issues of business, insurance, marketing, finance, banking, accounting, you name legal. We have every discipline offered. You just come in, you get your mentor, and we help you, and we help you build the strategic thinking that will empower you to be a success. That's our goal, is to empower you. We don't stand beside you. And owning your own business is it's a lonely endeavor. Isn't it lovely if you can come and bounce ideas off with someone who doesn't have an alternative goal except to help you? And so we really encourage you to join us. Sign up at the end of this. Go to score.org and find your mentor.
Awesome. And then kind of moving a little bit forward, but just real quick, let me say that viewers are more than welcome to submit questions regarding anything in terms of small businesses or financial planning or budgets or anything like that in the comments, in the Facebook comments below. And we'll be sure to screen those and then get those perhaps to our panelists today. Sue,
Now,
could you also maybe go...
Neither of us are lawyers, so don't ask any law questions.
Fair enough. Thank you. Could you kind of going along that before we get to Earle, kind of just setting up some context for what Earle specializes in, and he'll, I'm sure, get into that of what he specializes in. But could you also talk a little bit about what is SCORE's, I guess, stance or conception of creatives or artists? Like, do they see them as small businesses or?
yeah, they are small businesses, and they're vital to our society because art feeds our soul. And boy, do we need that now. So we want every aspect of our economy to thrive. And we don't have any artists as volunteers, and we are really interested if anyone who is an artist would like to volunteer to join us. But we certainly can help them manage the business aspects that that help their livelihood.
Awesome. And then finally, perhaps a final question to set up some more context for Earle. Could you go a little bit? You mentioned it earlier. Could you give a definition or perhaps more of a clarification between a physical disaster and an economic impact disaster?
Is that to me or to Earle? To me?
To you, Sue. Yes.
Okay. So we're all familiar with the physical disasters. They are man-made and or natural, right? You have the two kinds. This one is a pandemic, right? But you know, Houston's kind of ground zero on what you can get when it comes to disasters. So, you know, last year we had chemical plant explosions. We had, was a flood last year. I think that may have been in Melda. We've certainly experienced Harvey. Of course, a disaster for a regular business man-made would just be a fire. Or there was a doctor whose water pipes flooded, and he needed to find an alternative location, so he needed a continuity of operations plan. But you know, tornadoes, hurricanes, we have a nuclear plant down the road, you know, that could create a problem. You know, we're the center of the port, the oil and gas industry. You name it, we got it, because we're number one. so yeah. And normally for physical disasters, there is no public assistance. That's something that everyone needs to understand. There's no public assistance for physical disasters. For this economic disaster, there is public assistance. That's the CARES Act. And so when it comes to physical disasters, I want everyone to do the preparation, to have all their paperwork in place. And that's in what's called the go bag. And, you know, we could go at length on this. I can do a 1-hour presentation on physical disasters. But I think today everyone is really concerned about this economic disaster.
So, like, we've had some Houston Arts Alliance panelists on last time in another discussion, and one of the ways that they kind of like pointed out how this disaster or an economic impact disaster was different was that, let's say, during like after the wake of a hurricane, you know, businesses could maybe rely still on like business in different parts of Texas or even the United States or the world. But in this case, it's nationwide, it's worldwide.
Yes.
So could you perhaps give some more like context of like an economic impact disaster, like maybe what it takes for something like that to be declared, or like perhaps some of the things that people should take into account?
Well, for a disaster to be declared, okay, what you need to understand is that your local authority, you know, your local elected official is the person that has the responsibility for that area, okay? So that is why the mayor of Houston had to declare a disaster. And the county judge of each county is the person, they're the elected official who is responsible for the lives of their area, their division. And so that's why you have these different people who, you know, different leaders who are declaring disasters separately and at different times. And it's based on their view of what's going on. At the state level, the Texas Division of Emergency Management is in a coordinating role for the various local officials, elected officials. Then the governor, he is responsible based on how the other elected officials, all the different county judges, city managers, whatever. There are over 400 individual jurisdictions in the state of Texas for officials who are responsible for their jurisdictions. And so, some areas have not declared disasters because the situation on the ground is different. And then the governor has the responsibility for the state, okay? And the state can declare a disaster, and that's when the federal government can come in with FEMA assistance. But the FEMA assistance, for example, for a physical disaster would be for the specific area, like Harris County was declared a disaster for Harvey, okay? Does that make sense?
No, awesome. Thank you. No, I'm glad for that primer you gave us. And I think it answers like a question I was going to have, but I'd rather you demonstrate it. But I think it's very clear that SCORE is taking into account a lot of these factors in terms of the current crisis. And I think that only demonstrates, the knowledge that y'all are offering, even on one-to-one peer mentorship. And that's awesome. So thank you, Sue. I'm going to get to Earle now. And again, Sue, at any point, feel free to jump in. But Earle, so kind of could you maybe introduce yourself a little before I ask you kind of the meat and potatoes questions?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. My name is Earle Bolks, and my background is as a commercial banker. I retired from the banking business after about 40 years as a commercial lender and administrator, many years in Houston. I joined SCORE and became a mentor a couple of years ago, and my specialization is helping people develop business plans along with financial planning. And as a result of the situation we're in right now, the virus situation, I have been asked to, mentor or at least answer the questions that are related to the CARE Act activities or the disaster loans. And so that's primarily almost all I'm doing right now is answering questions, helping people apply for them and giving them information related to them.
Thank you. Okay. And kind of moving forward with that, you mentioned the CARES Act. We spoke with SBA a few sessions back, but the situation has drastically changed since we spoke to them. So I'm going to ask you perhaps some questions that maybe would be, basic information for people probably who are well versed in a lot of financial or economic initiatives and language. So could you, in the context of the CARES Act, could you perhaps define and maybe go a little bit in the difference between the economic impact disaster loan and the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program? So EIDL, could you go a little bit into what EIDL is or the PPP is and maybe the main difference?
Sure. Let's talk about that because there's a lot of that is a very, very common question. Let me go back a little bit and talk about the CARE Act, which was signed into law, a couple of weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and contains $2 trillion. Of that $2 trillion, about $360 billion of it is designated for the two loans we're talking about. One, Payroll Protection Plan, which we fondly call PPP, and the other is the economic or the EIDL loan, Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which we refer to as EIDL. And if you think about it, it's kind of funny. It's an EIDL loan for an EIDL circumstance. But anyway, those are the two loans we're going to talk about. There was $349 billion allocated for the Payroll Protection program, and there is $10 billion allocated for the economic or the EIDL loan. Obviously, there is a significant emphasis on the payroll protection plan loan and not as much emphasis on the EIDL loan. But let's talk about the difference between the two. There is one gigantic difference initially, and that is if used as requested or as required by the statutes or by the regulations, the PPP loan is 100% forgivable. That means if you borrow $50,000 and use it in the fashion that you indicated you're going to use it and appropriately, that $50,000 is 100% forgiven. You don't owe anybody anything at the end of that period. When you go to the EIDL loan, however, it is not forgiven, with one little exception I'm going to get to in a second. But the majority of the EIDL loan is not forgiven. It is truly a loan and has to be repaid. Personally, I prefer having them forgiven, if you know what I mean. There is one portion of the EIDL loan that can be forgiven, and that is when you apply for an EIDL loan, and I'm going to get to how you do that in a second, but when you apply for it, you can receive almost an immediate grant, a grant to get you by until such time as they can make a decision on the loan itself. That grant, should you not get the loan, is forgiven. Now, you hear a lot about $10,000 being the grant amount, and you can get up to $10,000. But as of this morning, and I was just informed, it was read, that the decision has been made within the last few days that the way they determine how much that grant is going to be is by how many employees you have. And that would be W-2 employees fundamentally. And if you have 3 employees, your total amount is $3,000. If you have 8, it's $8,000. So $10,000 is the maximum amount only for companies that have 10,000 or more employees. But again, if you apply and get that grant and then they reject you for some reason, that grant is forgiven. You don't owe them anything. You keep the money and you owe them nothing. That's the biggest difference. There are some other differences in it as to what the interest rates are if you turn out having a loan and what the amortization is or how long the loans can be paid back, how long you have to pay them back. On the EIDL loan, you actually have the potential of up to 30 years. Generally, I don't think it would go that far, but it could be at a rate of 3.75% for up to 30 years to pay the loan back, more likely 10 or 20 years. In addition to that, the initial payment is delayed. It is kind of nothing happens, let's say, for up to a year from the time that you get the loan. All right, so those are very significant and very attractive circumstances. On the PPP loan, you use the money in the first 8 weeks from the date that you receive it. So if you get the loan tomorrow, the meter starts running at that point. You use the money to pay your payroll and a few other things, and at the end of 8 weeks, we determine how much of it's forgivable and how much isn't. If there's a portion that isn't, that portion is put on a loan also. That loan is currently at 1% and can go up to 10 years. And it may not take that long. And also can be deferred. First payment can be deferred for a period of time. One more little detail, and that is if you take a draw from the EIDL loan, because you can apply for both, which you can do, the EIDL loan draw will be deducted from the amount that can be forgiven, or it might be deducted from the amount of the PPP loan. So I guess now we're getting confusing, but fundamentally, the other issue is that the PPP loan is intended to encourage you to keep the employees that you have, and if you're the only employee, to help you get through a hard period of time. The EIDL loan is a broader concept. It's not only to keep the employees, it's also to help with a broader context of operating overhead items. Therefore, you can see it could be for more money, but it is a loan, not a grant. Okay? And so that's kind of the difference. The big one is, in one case you can get it forgiven, in the other case you cannot.
That's a big difference. So thank you for laying that out. Sue mentioned earlier about how SCORE, it helps all facets of the economy. And in this case, in the context of Fresh Arts, we focus primarily on creatives and artists. Either one, perhaps either of you, can you kind of, in the context of the CARES Act as done, can you kind of go into what types of businesses can apply and are artists eligible for that? And do they need a certain business model or label? Like, do they need an LLC? Do they need anything? Please. Yeah.
No, you do not need that. If you consider yourself a business, you are a business. It's your livelihood, or at least a portion of your livelihood. You're eligible. You're eligible. I realize that in some cases, you may not have any employees. You may be the only employee, but that you are a sole proprietor, or maybe you have an LLC for some reason, and you're a sole member LLC. You're eligible. What you do for a living is not, with a few exceptions, is not a limiting factor in determining the loan. I have had as a mentor, not in this case, but as a mentor at SCORE, I have had a filmmaker making films here in Houston. I've had bands who are trying to make a career. I've had people who want to open clubs and people want to open art galleries. I think we've had many, many, many forms of artists in the past. Personally, in my own life, my daughter happens to be a novelist, so we're familiar with that. But what form of art you do or how you do it, with a few exceptions, and those would be sexually oriented businesses are not eligible. But art in general, whether you're a painter or a filmmaker or whatever you choose to do, you are eligible to apply.
Great. And then kind of going deeper into that question, artists perhaps in the past may have not seen themselves as businesses, so maybe they haven't done these programs before in terms of like lending or going up to banks. Are there any recommendations either of you that can give in regards to how artists can apply to the current CARES Act, the provisions within that? How can they apply with no prior history with a bank or lending program?
Well, everybody has probably got history with a bank. They may not have a lending history with it, but they probably use a bank. And I think it's important that an artist does look at themselves, not primarily as a business. They're primarily a creative entity who has a different objective than business, but has to operate within the context of the business in order to pay the bills. And so you have to look at yourself as a business. The way you go about it is this. Let's talk about the PPP, the Payroll Protection Plan. If you wish to apply for that, you need to contact your bank, the bank that you do business with, and determine whether they'll accept your application. If they won't accept you for one reason or another, either they're already overwhelmed, they've already met a goal, you do not have the kind of account that they want you to have, whatever it is, there are other banks who will accept you, who will sit and talk with you, regardless of whether you have a relationship with them or not. And there's a list of those banks online, and you can find them. I'm going to mention a couple. I'm not recommending. I am just mentioning a couple that I know are doing this. One is a Wallace Bank, and the other is a Spirit of Texas. And I know those two, and there are many others. So I'm recommending to you that if your bank, start with your bank. Always start with somebody, hopefully, who knows you or knows something about you. And get the application and look at it. It's a simple application. It is not complicated. And fundamentally, it's asking you on a payroll basis, what was a payroll during a specific period of time, and you can go from there. It's not complex. It doesn't require a lot of documentation to submit. It basically is initially going to just take your word for what you have to say. And let's talk about who you are for a second. Let's suppose that you're a performance artist. Maybe you're a band, and right now you have no gigs. You have nothing because everything is closed. So you're losing money like crazy. The bottom line is perhaps in this case, you are an independent contractor in this sense. The band does not pay salaries, it's an independent contractor. If the band is an entity in itself, it could apply, but if it not, you can apply as an independent contractor. A member of the band determines your loss of income is based on what it was last year or whenever, and make an application accordingly. So it's not 100% clear cut, but believe me, there are ways you are eligible and there are ways of doing it.
Just Sue, real quick, Earle mentioned perhaps some banks that just mentioned them in terms of people like maybe looking for some if their bank doesn't work out. Do you know of any financial institutions or banks that maybe you can mention?
I think the only other one perhaps you ought to consider is the Lift Fund. It's a micro lender, and obviously people are pretty overwhelmed right now in the banking industry. But basically what's happened is that the SBA is using its network of banks that do SBA loans to assist them in processing these loans. You know, in a physical disaster, which was always limited to a specific area, they would fly people down, right? And they would analyze each application for an SBA loan, disaster loan. Well, this is national. So there's no one to fly anywhere, and anyway, we're not allowed to move. And so what they're doing is they're tapping into their network, and you know, they're getting to it as fast as they possibly can. What I really want to stress to everyone today is, you know, it can be intimidating because you're artists. You know, finances aren't necessarily your strengths. And that's why SCORE is here for you. We want to help you. We want you to survive and thrive. So please, you know, go to score.org, and request a mentor. And you'll get someone like Earle, who really knows what he's doing, and he's staying abreast of it, because this is a very, very fast-changing situation. You know, Earle's the banker. I'm a marketing person, okay? And I help those people who are trying to figure out where they can get new markets, because it's dried up. How do they change how they do business? And so, you know, we're working together, and we're working tremendously hard. I know we can't see you in person, but we're doing it over video, over phone, over email. You know, we're adapting, and we're here for you. And boy, wouldn't you like Earle on your team?
No, for sure. I certainly want Earle on my team. Earle, I'm going to ask you some questions that you probably already answered, but like I just kind of want to state them in certain terms, and for our viewers, just so like if they're trying to pick up on certain language or words they've heard out and about, at least here it can be addressed definitively. So in terms of if an artist works for themselves and they have no employees, are they eligible for EIDL or PPP?
Yes. The answer is yes in both. Many companies, whether they're artists or whether they're retail, whatever they are, contain one person, and you are eligible. And I say that as a generality, and I mean that in the vast majority of cases, there might be a case where you weren't, but overwhelmingly the answer is yes. Probably.
Great. And then, thank you. If a small business has 1099 contractors, how do they apply for a PPP, and how do they know how much they're eligible for?
All right. If you have 1099 contractors, they are not eligible in your PPP application. But they are, since they're independent contractors, they're eligible for their own PPP loan. Because their income has been interrupted as a result of the pandemic, they can go to the bank and get an application, prove what their income was, or estimate what their income was during a period of time, and get their own loan. but they cannot be part of your application. That's the only issue.
Thank you for answering that. Oh, sorry,
Can
Sue,
I
go on.
interject something, Reyes? It's so crucial for the business owner or the band leader or whoever to show this loyalty to their staff. They have built this business, regardless of how they pay their employees. So many businesses pay on 1099s. They don't do W-2s, startups in particular. But if you can continue to build that relationship and show that you really cared, you've got talented people working for you. You've created a team. You don't want to lose that team. You don't want to break that trust relationship. And so you, as the leader of the organization, need to help your staff file those applications as well, because then you're showing that you care. In every disaster, our first responsibility is life and then livelihood of the business. And so you need to help your staff survive, have their families healthy and whole. And then they will come back and help you rebuild the business.
Thank you. Very important words. Thank you for adding that, Sue. Either one, Sue or Earle, in the event that these programs, like the EIDL or PPP, are exhausted for whatever reason, the situation changes every day, or maybe one doesn't qualify, what financial advice do you give for those artists or individuals to sustain themselves during this time? You can start.
Sure, and Sue, jump in. I'm going to give you my advice. My advice is come see us. Call us, come see us. Let's sit down and figure out what your cash flow situation is. Let's try to do some projections, and let's try to be creative in the way we find ways or things that you can do in order to survive. Each situation is different. Every person's needs and circumstances are different, but don't hesitate to give us a call and we can talk to you and help you make plans. The idea of doing a business plan along with an attached cash flow projection is not to go to the bank with it, is not to create something that you can use as a lending document. You do use it for that, but the idea is that it makes you sit and think about what you do and how you're going to monetize it, the process that you're going to use. And when you're done with it, you've thought it through, you know what your next step is, and it should give you some peace of mind. You should be able to sleep at night, and it should be able to tell you if things aren't working, where it isn't working, and changes that you need to make. But you have to look at yourself as a business. You have to monetize your gift. You have to take care of yourself and your family. And so we can help you make a plan to do that. Whether it's currently this issue is, well, we're going to monetize it by getting some help. But if you can't, then we're going to have to sit down together. We always say the first place to look for money if you need it is with your family and friends. I always say look at your friends first, because you can get new friends. Things don't work out. But the bottom line is come see us. Let's talk about it. That's all we can do.
I'd like to add to that, okay? I'd like to show you the example. I do the marketing, okay? And Earle is part of a team, and I am part of a team. I'm just one of many people who are very strong in marketing. But I always like to go back to the fundamentals of marketing, and I want to give you the example of our restaurants. Brennan's and Underbelly. I don't know if you all have been following in the Houston news, but they basically found themselves a new channel of distribution. It's difficult for people to do drive-through, but everybody's going to the grocery store. And so they cut a deal with HEB. And HEB has very kindly allowed them to sell ready-made meals with all profits going to the restaurant. That is their new lifeline. It is also a new channel of distribution, which is a very fundamental strategic concept of marketing. So, come see us. Let's talk about other ways that you can monetize your business, that you can think outside the box given the new situation that we're facing today. How can you use the new platforms we're working with to expand your brand and to monetize it?
Thank you. Some other questions, perhaps, in regards to either of you can answer. What are some other actions artists should be taking other than just applying for loans and grants? There's tons of funds out there, but again, like, situation changes all the time in regards to what's available, how much a certain fund has in its coffers. What are some other actions artists can or should be taking other than applying to loans and funds? Earle, please.
Well, let me say this first of all, as it relates to the amount of money that's available in the plans we've been talking about. It's in all likelihood, it's probably fundamentally either already exhausted or close to it. But that's okay, because there is a new bill that is cruising through Congress right now, and there will be a whole bunch more money in it by the time this time next week, I believe. So I think there's going to be availability, and I think it'd be worth your while to do it. However, if that's not in your future, if that's not what you're going to do, as to other kinds of places you can go, other things you can do, if you haven't looked at crowdfunding, you need to do that. And we can talk a lot about crowdfunding and the different kinds of crowdfunding and the way you do it. But it's really important, particularly for artists who are seeking support, to understand crowdfunding. There are lots of artistic related activities on certain kinds of crowdfunding. Some are devoted entirely to it, but it's very, very useful. Get on the net and take a look at crowdfunding and see if it might fit your emergency situation. That's one thing I would do almost immediately.
Right now, Reyes, cash is king. Cash is just king. And so they need to focus on that. And they need to figure out ways to get immediate cash, if at all possible. The other thing to do is to figure out ways to defer expenses. And that's when their relationships with their suppliers and their landlord or whoever becomes very important. So deferring expenses is another method of keeping cash. And so they need to pay attention to that as well.
Just kind of like a question thrown, like I can throw out there. Is there any certain things that you've heard of in regards to because normally if I were to just go to anyone and be like, oh, can I not pay this bill for this month or something like that? But if I were to say something that would maybe help me in that kind of objective. So if I were to say due to coronavirus or is there anything maybe I should have ready, or is there any kind of federal protection or anything that you know of that could kind of help in that, in deferring a payment?
Yes, I'm not aware of anything at this moment. I do believe that they keep your eyes open, because I think there are some things coming that are going to be included in some bills in the not too distant future. I know they are pushing hard to get a moratorium on mortgage payments for a period of time. That has not occurred. I'm not sure it will, but it is in the discussion, and so watch for that. And certainly, if you have a bank loan, a loan at a bank, absolutely talk to them. I think you'll find them very receptive to helping you through the process. After all, what is their option? I mean, their option is to do something that makes no sense whatsoever. So be sure that you talk with your creditors. But as far as I know, there are no formal programs except those that have been designated by specific lenders to allow for deferment. But don't hesitate. It makes a great deal of sense for the lender as well as for you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
One other thing I want to say, Reyes, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that,
No, please,
we're coming back to the importance of relationship building, and that is one of the preparations that you need to do for all disasters. You need to have a very strong relationship with your banker, your accountant, your insurance agent, and your lawyer, always. Those are the guys we call bail, because they bail you out when you're in trouble, okay? So they're the people who really have good advice, and we have those people. We don't have your banker, but we do have bankers like Earle at SCORE. But build those relationships so that they're strong, and then also build relationships with your suppliers, because if you can defer some of your payments to your suppliers, then you've held on to more cash, and just focus on that in your business. That's why we want you to come to SCORE. We really want to work with everyone to make sure that they keep their eye on the ball, that they understand that, yes, they, as Earle has pointed out, this is their passion, to make art that feeds our soul. And we are here to make sure that they are able to do it for a very long time as a thriving enterprise. But we like to do it individually. We like to mentor you individually, because you each, you've been concerned throughout this that we're not necessarily focused on your industry, but we focus on the individual and their passion. And so that's why we want to mentor them, and help them build a thriving enterprise.
Absolutely. We have actually a question from the viewers. Earle, if you could answer a question we have. If you receive a PPP loan for a nonprofit and your employees have applied for unemployment, is that an issue, or is there a specific action that you must take?
That's not a problem. That in getting the PPP loan as a nonprofit or anybody else, you're going to identify the period of time that you use to determine the amount you're eligible for and the number of employees that were involved during that period of time. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you use a period of time in 2019 in which you had 4 employees and your monthly payroll was $20,000. You're going to make an application for 2.5 times $20,000, indicating there are 4 people involved in this. You've laid those 4 people off. Well, what you do is you can hire them back and use the money that you have borrowed to pay them for the next 8 weeks, as well as to pay some other things. Must actually immediately after having received the loan, the meter starts running at that time. So they're on unemployment now. You can hire them back, hopefully have a use for them. You can pay them out of these funds, and other issues that are related. Insurance costs are included in this and some other things. And at the end of the period, if you do that, that loan is forgiven. So yes, the fact you're on unemployment now doesn't make any difference. The idea of the loan, conceptually, what was involved was to try to get people off unemployment, to try to ensure that they had income in order to meet their obligations, to buy groceries and to pay their own bills and everything else. So as a nonprofit, your circumstance is exactly the same. There are some other issues. If you think through it, there are some other issues, but really that was the primary. PPP is intended to be a grant, not a loan. And if you treat it according to the regulation, when you read it, you'll see that if you do what is asked, it is a grant and should be a grant. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. I feel like it did. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Kind of rounding out the discussion, one other question I have is, SCORE, amazing. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Are there other perhaps organizations, programs, or resources that artists should be looking into in general for support, or do you recommend any other ones just in case, like in regards to people's specific needs?
Well, there's also the SBDC, Small Business Development Council. which operates under the umbrella of the University of Houston. Those are actually paid professionals, but their services also are free. And then there's Lift Fund, which is a micro lender that's also very well respected. And then for those people who only want to work with women, some women want to only work with women, there's the Women's Business Economic Council, I believe, WBE. Yeah, and you can go to the SBA website and they show you these resources. So there are multiple resources, and we hope that your listeners will seize these opportunities to survive and thrive. So.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Sorry, go on, Earle.
No, I think you've covered it, Sue. I mean, I can't think of anything beyond that. And the most important thing to do is to go to these websites and educate yourself as to what is possible. And if it's confusing or if you feel uncomfortable, don't hesitate to call us and make an appointment, and we'll be happy to talk to you and try to get you on the right track.
All right,
Reyes,
so two more questions.
Just one more thing. I want to empathize with your audience, because we're in the middle of something that is helping us experience grief and sadness and isolation, and it also means it's hard to concentrate. And so we understand that these are new concepts for you. And so we're here to help you work through it, to help you focus on it, and we do it at your pace, not at our pace. So please feel comfortable coming to talk to us.
All right, thank you. And so we have two more viewer questions to finish out this discussion.
Okay.
Earle, so a question from a viewer. So this viewer owns a business. They're a sole proprietor. Their health insurance is not connected to their business, and they had it through the marketplace as an individual. The PPP loan says it covers the cost of payroll and benefits like health insurance, but they can't find any information about if they can include the cost of health insurance in their PPP application if it's not directly purchased by the business. Do you have any information or suggestions of where they can find more information on that, or if you could answer maybe to that concern?
Yes, I don't think that you're going to find any other information on it. My attitude in that respect would be, what you're saying is that you get paid, and out of your payroll you pay your own health insurance instead of the company paying it. But my belief is it's irrelevant, that you should include the cost of that health insurance in your application. The worst thing that can happen, people, is that somebody denies it, or there's an argument about it later, but you're not guilty of anything. It's not like you're committing a fraud or you're doing something terrible. You're not. We are interpreting the situation. The cost of health is included in the process, and I certainly would include it if I were you.
Thank you. And then one more question from a viewer. So in addition to deferring payments and speaking to creditors, if an artist is in a cash flow bind right now and needs to decide which bill to pay, like rent, like a car note, like electricity, etc., what is the best strategy to decide what they should do? And that could be either Earle or Sue, but
yeah, that's a tough one. But my advice to you is to apply for the PPP right away. Absolutely today. It may not be eligible. I forget. Maybe it's the 10th is the date of eligibility, but either today or tomorrow. Get involved in it right away. I mean, the worst thing can happen is they won't give it to you. But start now. Now, if trying to get by for the next, if it's a matter of trying to get by for the next few weeks, just try to get whatever deferments you can in that process. And the other thing is you can apply for the EIDL loan. If you're the only employee, you can only get $1,000 pre-advance. But if you apply for the EIDL loan, which is done on the government website, go to sba.gov, follow the directions. You apply online. They're supposed to give you an advance within 3 days up to, and I've told you it'll be $1,000 per employee, and you should get that almost immediately. It hasn't worked that way, but I believe it's working that way in the next few days. And that's the only advice that I can think of.
All right. So again, thank you all for such an amazing discussion. We're pretty much at the end of our time. Again, SCORE, I've known about SCORE, big fan of your work. So again, thank you two for the work that you're doing. And thank you for dedicating your time today to answering some really tough questions, some very ongoing questions, and the situation changes every day. So again, everyone, please go to SCORE. I believe the website is houston.score.org. for the Houston chapter. Again, thank you, Sue. Thank you, Earle. Good luck in everything that you're doing. I hope this, finishes out soon enough so y'all can rest. I imagine y'all are having a tough time in your own way. So, again, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
So with that in mind, again, visit our website, fresharts.org, where you can look at other resources that we have, some other information that we found, funds, grants, resources on how to apply to these different sources of funding. Other things to take into account is that there are funds opening up every day. Some of them might run out, but again, like kind of what piggybacking on what the SCORE mentor said, it doesn't hurt to apply to a lot of things. Even if you are denied, HA has even recommended that you apply to certain programs, even though you may not qualify, you may not get them. Some of them are kind of prerequisites according to what's happened in the past. Applying to certain funds, even though you may not receive them, or programs, even though you may not be eligible, some of them are still prerequisites to access other funds. So that's one of the reasons why we keep bringing up these programs, but also because they're there to help you. And so there's different ways to kind of access different funds. There's different ways to stay afloat. And so we're presenting as many options as possible. So please, to keep abreast of those changes, SBA.gov and Houston.score.org. Thank you for tuning in. You please always access our website or go to our website to submit questions to us, to submit any events that you have that you want us to share. If you have any topics that you'd like covered, if you have a story to tell, just really anything that, again, that you're going through or what you contribute to your community, we want to share that. We want to know that. We want to provide a discussion and more information regarding that. So please, in the comments below, you'll see a link to submit any tips, topics, stories that you want us to cover or to share. So again, please let us know. Fresh Arts is always trying to stay abreast of the situation and help our community, help the artists, as Sue said, the soul, the lifeblood of our communities. So again, thank you. Tune in next Tuesday. We're going to have a cool update of things that are happening. Again, as Earle and Sue have mentioned, the situation changes every day. So we're going to always try to stay abreast of the information available. Please stay tuned, and we'll get that to you as best as we can. So thank you for watching. Thank you to Angela in the back, always doing the great work of posting all the comments, but also setting this up. Thank you to Houston Arts Alliance, who is working with us to have these discussions. Thank you to, here's their COVID-19 resources that you can go and access. They're really great. They offer some really good tips and recommendations. They have really, really great resources on there, and they have a fund They're working with the Houston community, the Greater Houston Partnership, for a fund that you can apply to, you can donate to. And that's another tactic, again, to address the issue that's happening right now. That's great, and that's important. And then I also want to thank Ben Doyle, who is making this look really cool, making this really sleek and smooth. So thank you, Ben Doyle, Bend Productions. All right, so again, tune in next Tuesday. Tune in to Fresh Arts in general. If you do not follow us on our social medias, please do so. Every day we're posting tips, we're posting links, we're posting information. So again, stay tuned. Thank you, stay safe, and see you next time.